Sear, our non-stimulant, thermogenic, and recomposition agent. Sear is a super cool product because it's going to help you utilize turning your white adipose tissue, which is for storage of fat, into brown adipose tissue, which is going to help with energy production. So this is great to use for a competition prep or in your weight loss phase. So you can stack it with a stimulant-based thermogenic, or you could also use it in your off-season or muscle building phase to help keep you lean and mean. Sear.
All right, what is up, you guys? Well, welcome back to the Pro Physique Code podcast. So today's going to be a little bit different. It's just Evan and I holding down the house today because Paul is on, I think he's on vacation. I think he's in like North Carolina. So it's just us two today. So we're going to be talking about a good and I think a very valuable topic. So first off, how are you, Evan? How was your weekend? Because you went to Universe, right?
Yeah. I went up to Universe other than a bunch of canceled flights and delayed flights and sitting on the tarmac for hours and hours and hours on end. It was good. It was good.
Did you
I feel
really?
like flying these days, everything's difficult, but
I actually, it's funny. I saw your, I think I saw your story like on Instagram on Thursday about your flight, or something happening. And because I was flying that day too, not to
yeah.
Universe, but actually my flight on Thursday was delayed for weather reasons, but thankfully it was fine. But oh, that sucks. Well, you got there though, at least, right? Was it a direct flight?
Yeah. Yeah, it was direct flight. I got there late. I was supposed to try to get there around 10:30 so I could get there the same time Paul and Steema did. It was going to be easy, but I didn't end up landing until I think almost 4. That was after
Oh.
2 canceled flights and bad rebooks and everything else. It was just no reason why they canceled it. They just canceled it, or they didn't give me a reason at least. But we ended up getting there, and it was good. It was good. Show was good. Big show, big show.
Yes. I mean I expected that. I think Universe is always a little bit bigger, just especially because I think it's the first national show of the year that offers masters only
Yeah.
divisions. So I feel like that naturally always makes it a little bit of a bigger show in general. But yeah, I want to hear share your thoughts like in a nutshell. What did you notice anything in particular? Because you had one girl compete there, right?
Yeah. I was supposed to have 2, and ended up having 1. I can tell you the first thing that shocked me was how many wellness girls there were. There was a
Mm,
fair amount of wellness girls there. Yeah, that
okay.
that really shocked me. Not that, just normally you go to most shows and wellness is one of the smaller divisions like wellness and figure. But here it was pretty large, not near as big as bikini, but still big. And the way they did the show this year was, I'm not sure if they did this in the years past, was they did physique and figure, and I'm assuming women's bodybuilding on Wednesday, and Thursday was just bikini and, or I'm sorry, on Friday it was just bikini and wellness. So, I didn't expect the day to be that long, but we ended up I think prejudging ended at finals. I think we're supposed to start at 4 and prejudging it'll end till almost like 4:45. It was a long
Wow. Wow.
day. Yeah, tons of competitors there. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
But there was definitely a trend that I noticed and saw, and me and Steven talked about this a fair bit, was there were some girls they placed in the first call outs a few times that I was pretty surprised because I was a head judge, and their conditioning was not really there. But we started kind of noticing a trend that they were looking for a baseline amount of muscle at this time. Most of the time, in a lot of shows you'll go to, if you're very conditioned, you're going to get a look and you're going to get compared against everyone else that has good conditioning. But it seemed at this show they were favoring you. You had to have muscle to be able to even have a shot here at this one. Not a crazy amount of muscle, but a good balanced amount of muscle. And they were favoring that over conditioning at some points. Now, obviously, the winners had a great combination of both. So, but I'm more talking about the overall look of people trying to get into the first call outs there.
Yeah, yeah. Like I had told you before we started this meeting, like I was watching, from afar. I was just watching like the NBC News Online updates, and it's hard because sometimes, I look at the pictures and you see certain things in pictures, and it sometimes you're like, oh wow, that girl
Mhm.
has a lot of muscle, or oh wow. I mean, you'll see certain things, you're like, oh, that surprised me. But I try to refrain from putting too much like judgment just on the pictures, because I also know pictures can add a little bit of size to people, right? So,
Yeah.
rather than looking at a picture and thinking like, oh my God, that person has way too much muscle, why were they rewarded? I know that probably in person they didn't have, they weren't as big as they appeared in the pictures, but it looks like everybody, I mean, that one, it was very well deserved. And I mean, it was, like you said, a very big show. So lots of competition.
Yeah. And I'll say this. It was very apparent he was going to win her class the moment they walked out. Very
Okay.
similar to like Stassi was at Amateur Olympia. It was very
Yes.
similar to that, to when the girls walked out the first time. We're like, there's a winner. Nobody's beating her. I mean,
Okay.
most of the class winners were heads and tails above everyone else, like in most cases with that. And there was a lot of girls that from the front were lights out and they turned around and did not look like the same person. A
Yes.
lot of it is, obviously hip mobility, and their front glutes look really great in the front pose, and they turn around and there's nothing there. There's
Yep.
nothing there.
Yep. I
There's
feel
a
like
lot of that.
you see that so much in bikini, especially at amateur or not amateur, at regional shows. I feel like you see a lot of girls who have great front poses, but the real like distinction of who wins and who doesn't is like when they turn around. I mean, you could have a girl with a phenomenal front pose, and then she turns around and her lower body is like 4 weeks behind her front pose. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And this upcoming weekend too, I know that we'll put this out on Monday. So obviously the weekend will be wrapped up by that point. But this weekend there are a lot of pro shows. So we have Republic of Texas, which is definitely the one I have my eye on. I love that show. And,
Mhm.
and I know Paul has, I think, three at least three pros in that show. I know Steven has one. There's the Atlanta Pro. I think this weekend is also, is it the Vancouver Pro? I think that's this weekend as well. And then there's like a
I'm not
few
sure.
Europe shows. There's like 5 total bikini pro shows
Yeah.
this week. It's pretty crazy. So that'll be exciting to see.
One other thing I want to mention about Universe that I saw a fair amount of, and it's something that I want to reiterate to everyone out there, is a lot of girls really practice a routine, and a routine is really important.
Yeah.
If you go to a national show, the most important, and honestly, not the only, but about 95% of it is going out during that first initial comparison and nailing your front pose and nailing your back pose. If you mess up at that point, you're pretty much done. It doesn't matter how good your routine is, because you don't even do your routine, you know, most of the time
Yeah.
until finals at these large shows. And
Well,
it's
that's a great point. And
uh,
I don't know if you saw it right after Universe Becky Clausen put something on her story about posing as well. And she was like, guys, like as judges, we can't sit there and imagine how you would look if if you opened up a little bit more, or if you angled a certain way. Like we can't just sit there and imagine
mhm.
what you would look like if you're posing right. Like what you present on stage, like that's what we see. And you're so right. Like at national shows, don't have a lot of time in general. I mean, and I know with a lot of my girls
You have a first impression.
exactly, exactly. And I know with a lot of my girls too, when I'm practicing posing with them, especially as we get closer to show day, we'll run through like drills of just walking on and hitting their front pose and nailing it, like from the moment they step on
Mhm.
stage or from the moment they hit their front pose. Because I do feel like you said, that is so crucial. Like you don't have time to walk on, hit your front pose, and adjust for 3 seconds. Like you don't have time to do that, right? How you hit it the first time, that's your first impression, and that really speaks volumes.
And let's put this in perspective. Wellness, the show started at 9. Wellness, I think, was done by 11:15, maybe 11:30 at the absolute latest. And bikini didn't get off stage until almost 5 p.m. That's how many bikini, and they ran it fast. That's how many bikini girls there were at this show. So you have to catch the judge's eye the moment you walk out for those initial comparisons. And if you're breathing heavy in the stomach, or if you are not pushing the hip out, if you are not hitting your pose, you're not standing up tall, if you're not angled to the judges correctly, you're done. You're
Yeah.
done. Like you don't
It's,
have a shot to come back from it.
I know it's so crucial. I mean, don't let that be what knocks you down. Because I mean, it's just posing is it's so sad how
It's
like,
practicing.
and yeah, practicing, being able to do it in your sleep, not just waiting until last minute to practice your routine. Yeah, for sure. Well, let's dive into our topic.
And what
Go
one more
for it.
quick thing I wanted to hit on this as well, because I do think this is just an important part of it all. And it's that's why I'm really big on people that do one show and want to go to a national show is not a good idea. You don't have enough stage time. You don't have enough of that. And you're going to be nervous at a big national show. And being able to walk out, you need those reps under your belt. Not reps in the mirror, not reps in the gym. You need reps on stage to do that, to be able to go out and nail it. I can't tell you how many girls could probably get their pro card at their first national show, but jitters get to them. They don't hit the front pose. They don't transition correctly. Little bitty things. It's not the physique. It's everything kind of around the edges with that. So it's one of those things that just takes time, and give yourself some grace and some peace with that too. Don't realize that not everybody gets the pro card at their first time out.
Oh yeah,
Very
100%.
few do.
No, that's a great point. I'm glad you said that. Yeah. Well, that segues us into our kind of main topic that we wanted to take some time to just talk a little bit about this today. Not that it's going to take us like too long, but I think that this is a good topic to talk about. We're going to talk about how to interpret and understand the feedback that you get from judges as a competitor. And I think why this can be so confusing to people is a lot of times the judges are going to tell you, like, they're going to give you feedback, but sometimes feedback can mean like one of two things, right? And so I do feel like with feedback, you really do have to interpret it well, because it can mean a couple of different things, right? Depending on the person, the physique, etc. So we got a couple of people too that DM'd us, with specific questions about like, oh, how would I interpret this? So we'll go through those. But I would say, let's start off by talking about how you can get judges feedback. Cause I get that question sometimes. Some people don't know like that you can get feedback from the judges. And I always say the best possible scenario is getting your feedback in person after the show. Now, Sandy Williamson is notorious for being a judge who always stays after a show, whether it's a national show, whether it's a regional show. Like, she is known for being a judge that will always stay after, and you can go up to that judge's table after the show and get feedback while like you are fresh in her brain and fresh in her mind. I think a lot more judges have started to do that, not all of them, but that's always going to be the best possible scenario, is to get the judge after the show while they're, while you're fresh in their brain. Or I even had a client once who, the show wrapped up, she was walking out and she caught one of the judges in the hallway and just asked them for quick feedback. So, there's always that option too. But I would say that's always going to be the best possible scenario, because the second thing, that you can do, and that, I encourage everybody to do, is emailing the head judge after your stage shots are out, right? The only downside with that is a lot of judges, they do have other jobs during the week. And so, your responses are not always going to be the quickest. So, if you're doing another show in a week or two, you may not get feedback, before that next show if you just email the judge. So either getting it in person, I think that's the most valuable, 100%. But if that is not an option for you, emailing them once the NPC News Online stage shots are up, I think is very valuable.
Yeah. And look, every show has an athletes meeting too. I recommend asking at the athletes meeting, what's the process for feedback? Because every show's a little bit different. If there's a pro-am with it, a lot of times the judges will be backstage after the pros get off. And sometimes you may be able to get a little bit of a sneak of something in there. If the finals they've already made their decisions there. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, depends on the judge. Most of them will wait till the end of the show. If it's a show like Tampa Pro, to where it doesn't get done until almost midnight, good luck getting feedback after that, right? Because most judges are trying to get out the door and they're not wanting to wait in line. Now, a little bit of a hack when it comes to this too is I would personally wait until after the athletes meeting is done and then walk up and ask the person who hosts the athletes meeting one-on-one with that. Because that way you're going to know the information. Because here's the thing, like, everyone wants to get feedback, or some people do, some people don't, but you don't. If you know when you can get it, you can get yourself to that front of the line quicker too, and not have to wait if a bunch of people are waiting for that. But yeah, every show is a little bit different. Some shows, especially kind of like in the Northeast, sometimes they don't like to give feedback in person after the shows. They want you to email the judges, which is not my favorite way of doing it. But a lot of shows will in person. If that's the case, please do that.
Yeah. And I mean, when in doubt, I have clients that do this all the time. They'll compete at a show, we'll get their pictures, and then, they'll ask me, hey, like, who do I email? And I'll usually try to help them to navigate, figure out who the head judge was, get that head judge's email. If we can't get that, I'll figure out a way to get it for them. So when in doubt, just ask your coach to help you with that. But let's dive into, some different scenarios and just some different things that I guess that are very common for judges to tell people, like, in terms of feedback. And actually, one quick thing before we go into that. I know I've said it before on this podcast, but I always highly recommend if you're going to get feedback, especially in person, do like a voice recording, like put a voice memo on your phone and record the judge's feedback. That way you can share it with your coach, because I know you've talked about this before, Evan, where, sometimes some clients, they'll hear something and they misinterpret it, right? They may think the judge told them one thing when really the judge didn't tell them that. So I always say record the judge's feedback. That way you can share it with your coach, because like I said at the beginning of this podcast, that's the hard thing about judges' feedback is it can be sometimes interpreted a couple different ways. And, I think the best example, and maybe the one we can start with, is when, a judge is telling a client or is telling a competitor, you need to be fuller, right? Well, that could mean a couple different things, right? That could mean maybe you just need more muscle. That could mean you just need to fill out a little bit more aggressively, fill your muscles out more, and just, eat more going into the show. So it can mean a couple different things. So I think that's where it becomes a little tricky to decipher. So yeah, so I guess we can kind of start with that first one. So Evan, if your client, like, I guess let's start with talking about the feedback of like, you need to be fuller. So how do you interpret that, and what kind of first comes to your mind when you hear that?
Typically, if someone says they need to be fuller, the conditioning is probably pretty decent at that point with it. Maybe not perfect, but pretty decent. Um, my most assumptions is if that said, the judges assumes you're a little bit on the flatter side, but then again, it's just an assumption. It's just an assumption. That person may just need more muscle. That person maybe stress got to them and they were a little bit even watery at times. Typically, that's not necessarily a fuller thing, but it can give you more of a little bit smooth look. It can make you look a bit flat. A lot of times, flat and watery can be somewhat similar looking. And that's why it's important to go to your coach with it, because he's going to know, he or she is going to know what happened, because they're going to see throughout the process. If they say you need to be fuller, it's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe we need to feed you more into the show, or, they need more muscle with it. You have to be able to interpret that. And it's very similar to tighter, right? That's another one we could go into as well. That's I think, the two big ones. But what about you, Lexie? What do you think when someone says you need to be fuller?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it at the beginning when you said, usually if somebody gets feedback of they need to be fuller, they're most of the time they probably did become in condition enough. And I think, like you said, it's a matter of your coach is going to your body knows what you look like at your best, right? And I know one thing, like Sandy Williamson, I think she told Paul and I this when we interviewed her a while ago on this podcast. And this is standard for all judges. Like, the judges are not coaches, and a lot of them will say up front, like, they don't they don't know, they leave our job, they leave coaches, like, they leave that job to us. They don't really understand, they're going to tell you what they see, right? But they don't know, what you would look like if if you fill up your muscles a little bit more. They don't know, like, they don't understand the physiology as much as like your coach does, right? So they're just going to tell you based off of what they see on stage that day. So so like, I think if you are somebody and you do have a good muscular base and your coach, and that, and your feedback is you need to be fuller, the way I would probably interpret that is, okay, we need to fill out more aggressively, right? As a coach, if I know somebody has a solid amount of muscle and they're getting that feedback, I'm going to say, okay, we need to just fill you up more, probably be a bit more aggressive with carbs, maybe pump up a little bit different. So that way your muscles appear fuller, because we know you already have the muscle. Now, sometimes as a coach, newer competitors, especially, or people who just haven't been lifting for as long, of time, or just younger competitors, if we got them as lean as they could get, and, I know that they do need to put on more muscle long term and they're getting that feedback, well, then as a coach, I'll probably interpret that as, okay, we do need to probably take some time to build and grow and actually add muscle, because that's what the judge is asking of us. It's not a matter of just filling out more aggressively, because we already have done that. So that's kind of how I would interpret that either or way.
And we talked about this a little bit before the podcast, Leslie, but I think that's a good time to kind of go over this. Is when judge gives you feedback, it's not against how you could have who beat you.
Yes.
It's not about you needed to do this to beat the person that beat you or to win the show. It's about to bring the best look for you. This is what I think you should do. Now, you could do all of those things and still not win. That's the frustrating part, right? You could do everything the judge said. You could be perfect and all that, but there could still be somebody that has better lines, better muscle, better presentation than you. So don't look at this as I did everything the judge said and I still didn't win. You still might not.
Right. Right. And I think we've talked a little bit about this before on the podcast, but it's also it really, and this is something unfortunately in this sport, you have to know that you can't always control. You can't control who you're going to go up against, right? So, like, if you go into a show and, you know, every girl up there or the majority of the girls up there have a ton of muscle, right? And you have a little bit less muscle, and, they're probably going to reward the girls with a little bit more muscle because that's, those people are comparing better to one another, right? Whereas if you're the outlier,
Yep.
and so that's where it can be tricky too. And I follow a lot of pros, like a lot of bikini pros, and a lot of them share their feedback post show. And and it's always interesting to hear, like, from, I think, like certain pros, a lot of them get different feedback every show. Sometimes they're not getting the same feedback every show. And I think a lot of that feeds into who they were against, right? Like who was in the lineup and how they compared to that group of people. So, yeah, so I think, that is a great point. Now let's dive into the other, so besides just being fuller, if a judge tells you, okay, you need to be more conditioned or you need to be leaner, again, I feel like that. I mean, I don't want to say that means
That's pretty.
it's pretty straightforward, right? Essentially, I think it means, I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to mean, you need more lines, you need more definition so we can actually see your muscles. But I know we've also talked about this on the podcast loosely before. Sometimes, you get a girl and you get them as lean as they can get, right? And they may get feedback from the judge of like, you need to be leaner. But we know as coaches, if we get them any leaner, they're going to lose their pop with their muscle. They're going to look very stringy. They're going to look like they have no muscle. And so
Yep.
then it's like, well, we can either get leaner and risk just not having any muscle or fullness or pop on stage, or we can interpret that feedback as, okay, we got as lean as we needed to get. And because we're still not lean enough to see that muscle definition, we probably need to take a little bit of time to add some size, add some muscle volume. That way we don't have to get as like tiny and lean to see that muscle pop.
Look, all judges are not created equally, just like all athletes are not created equally, just like all coaches are not created equally. Everyone has their strong points.
Mhm.
Judges that have been doing this for a long time, a lot of them will not say you need to be more conditioned if they know it would bring a worse look. I have a perfect example of this. I worked with a very tall girl last year, and she was 5'9". Her stage weight was 119, which is low for 5'9", quite low. And she stepped on stage. The judge was like, well, you could have been a little tighter. I was like, well, if we would have been a little tighter, he's like, yeah, she would have probably looked like a skeleton up there. He's like, so I think this is probably as good as we could have done. The truth is, she just need muscle. And that's why taking that information back to your coach is so helpful with that, because all they can see is what they see on stage at that time. They don't know what you would look like leaner, right? They don't know what you would look like leaner.
Yeah,
So that's one way to look at it. I
that's a
think,
great.
yeah, and you can only, here's the God honest truth. And I know everyone that competes for the first time wants a good solid glute ham tie-in. I completely get that, but you got to have the muscle to support it. If you don't have the muscle to support it, it's not going to be there. If it is there, trust me, it's going to end up in a far worse look and a far worse placing.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I can even use like past seasons of mine as an example. So I think back to my last season, and and I could have been tighter in my glutes, but I also know I was really small, and that's probably about as lean as I could have gotten before I would have just like looked pretty much emaciated, right? Like not like an athlete. So in my mind, I knew, okay, I either have one or two options. I can keep pushing, I can get a little bit crispier in the glute ham tie-in, but I can also, if I do that, I'm probably going to compromise a little bit of size and fullness in my upper body. And I'm, probably don't want that. Or, the way what I ended up doing and how I interpreted that as well, I need to go and I need to build more muscle, specifically in the glutes. That way I don't have to get as tiny next time to see that pop and to see that definition, to get lean enough in the glutes. So, and I think feedback is so valuable, not only because it tells you, how you can improve show to show, which is what we all want to do, right? But I think feedback from the judges is also very valuable because it definitely tells you and can give you an idea too of if it's worthwhile to still continue on competing in your season, or if it's maybe a little bit smarter to wrap up your season, go into a building phase,
Yeah.
and come back with a little bit more muscle on your frame, right? And I know that's a question I got on Instagram, and my question box was like, well, how do you know if you need to, how do you know if you can keep competing, or how do you know if you really just need to take an off season or an improvement season? And, and I think we will probably both agree in the sense of like, when you get feedback of, you need to be a little bit tighter, or you need to be a little bit leaner. If you already have, like, if you have a solid amount of muscle and your feedback is you just need to be leaner, a lot of times that can be achieved, and you can go into another show, and easily just get a little bit leaner and look better at your next show, right? But if you're getting feedback of, you need to be fuller, or you just need more size, like, that's probably one of those situations where, you have to have that conversation with your coach. Maybe you do have the muscle, maybe you just didn't fill out enough, right? But if you truly had a great peak, you filled out as much as you could, and you're still not full enough, or you don't have enough muscle, that may be a conversation that you have to have with your coach of, okay, do I want to keep competing and know that maybe I'm not, I can keep competing and I can maybe do okay, but I'm not going to do super well? Or do I maybe want to just cut my season short, which I know is never easy to do, and then grow and then come back and implement on that judge's feedback and do a little bit better when you have more size and more muscle on your frame? Because, honestly, especially naturally, like, you're not, the expectation of being able to put on a ton of muscle show to show, it's just, unfortunately, it's a very unrealistic thought. You're not going to be putting on a ton of muscle if if a judge tells you you need to put on size and you have 5 weeks until the next show you want to do. You may think, oh, let me train really hard, let me put on this muscle, but that's just not enough time to do so.
Like, even if you are natural, it's very, unless it's your first time ever doing a PED, it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to add muscle show to show. You can continue to get tighter and fill out more show to show, but the best thing to do is honestly just to ask. Be like, hey, do you think I should do another show? And it also depends on your goal. Is your goal to win an overall and go to a national show? Is your goal to win your class? Is the goal to place better? What's your goal? And
Yeah.
and ask the judge, and ask every judge you get the feedback that, because you may get different answers from that, and then bring it back to your coach, and then you can go over that. A perfect example of this, I had a first-time competitor that did a show 2 weeks ago. She won the overall in novice and true novice, and the feedback, we knew she needed to be a little bit tighter, but her shape is outstanding. To be her absolute best, she needed to be a little bit tighter. She's also a small girl and just needs to be bigger. Also something that we knew. Now, here's the thing. The judges said, like, yeah, you could be a little bit tighter and be in the mix to win your open class for sure with that. But is she going to go in and win an overall and be first call to the national show right now? No, she needs to be bigger. She needs more size for that. So then we make a decision. It's, do you want to keep competing because you enjoy it? Like, there's other shows right around. 3 or 4 weeks ain't gonna make a difference in an off season, right? So do you want to keep competing? Do you want to practice your stage presence? Do you want more time on stage? Or do you just want to bounce out, go directly into an off season? What is your goal with this? Her goal is to be as good as she possibly can be at the end of the sport. So with that, we're going to take an off season. We immediately pulled out and just started to grow. It all just depends on what your goal is and work towards that goal.
Yeah, no, I mean, you mentioned, like, I love the fact that you said, like, just ask the judges straight up. Like, if you, let's say you do a show and maybe you don't place as well as you would have wanted to, ask the judge straight up. Like, if you have intentions, if you had intentions on doing another show moving forward, ask the judge, like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this show, what do you think, right? And they may or may not give you a direct answer, but what do you have to lose by asking, right? And I think another thing to consider too is, like, asking that never hurts, because a lot of times too, like, you're never going to be able to control, like I said at the beginning, you're never going to be able to control who shows up at your show, right? And there's no way around the fact that we all know that there are some regional shows that are really competitive and some that just aren't, right? So if you happen to go into a show, and there's not a ton of competition, and let's say, you win your class, or maybe you win an overall, don't just assume because you won the show or you won, your class, that automatically means like, oh my God, let me go to nationals, right? Don't be afraid to still get feedback from the judge, and ask them, what do you think? Should I, do I have a chance if I go to nationals? Because the judges can only judge what shows up on the day at that competition, right? And there are some shows where, like I said, they're just going to be a little bit smaller. Maybe nobody really hits the mark, but they have to reward somebody, right? So the person who wins, yeah, they may look good, but maybe they just, they don't look great enough to do well at like a national show. So I think that that is, a very valuable thing to do, is just ask the judges what they think about
Yeah.
your next show plans, and get feedback regardless of if you win the show or not. I think some people assume, oh, I won the show, there's nothing that the judges have feedback for me on, but honestly, that's not the case scenario a lot of times. I mean, you even hear of these top level pros who win shows and they still get their feedback, because there is always something you can improve upon, right? You just happen to be the person
Yeah.
that day that fit the criteria best. But who knows, there may be something you need to improve on, so that way you can continue to be, unbeatable show to show.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, that's absolutely the case. Everyone should get feedback and figure out kind of where they want to go with this. And I'll give you a perfect example of winning a show doesn't mean you need to do a national show. I've had a girl win her class when she was a good 15 pounds over stage weight,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it shouldn't have happened. Not if there was a decent lineup, right? But if she was to go to a national show, it would not have gone well for her. A perfect example of this is, I won't say the judge's name, but he's a high level judge, an Olympia judge. And it was after a show probably like 2 years ago. And we were eating dinner with him afterwards. And he said, these shows are the most frustrating ones. He was like, because that girl that won the overall go to the nationals and thinks she has a shot. And that girl has no shot. There was just no one here.
Yeah.
And that's why asking is incredibly helpful. And not just ask them, say, hey, my goal is to turn pro. Do you think I have a shot to turn pro at this show? Not, do you think I should do a national show? If you ask, do you think I should do a national show? They'll say, yeah, you'll be competitive. Of course, go do it. But if your goal is to win your pro card, you need to ask, say, hey, this is my goal, is to win my pro card. Do you think I have a shot to go do this? Ask.
Yeah.
Because, and the truth is, most people don't ask because they're scared of the answer.
Yeah. And honestly, I think you have to remember too, like the judges, they're not out to get anybody. In fact, most judges, I would say, I would like to say all of them are very like they want the best for athletes, right? They're going to be honest and upfront with athletes, and they're not out there to get any athlete or anything like that. So yeah, so just don't be afraid to ask for those very specific answers, even if you feel like you don't want to hear the answer. Even if it's hard to hear, it's gonna make you a better athlete. So yeah, I
Mhm.
think and we could do a whole episode, I feel like, on, and I think we did one like a long time ago, but we could certainly do another episode on like how to know if you're ready to go to nationals. Cause, like you said, oh gosh, and it pains me too when you see girls who win, an overall at a show, and you just know, like as coaches, oh, they look good. They were the best at that show, obviously, but like they're not gonna do well at nationals. And it's sad, especially when they don't know that, or they don't have somebody to tell them, or they didn't get feedback. So yeah, that is very much so a thing. Something else I wanted to touch on really briefly is I got somebody that asked about, so she told me specifically that some feedback that she got at her last show from a judge was that she looked just very straight up and down and just like very linear, right? And she asked, like, what does that mean? Like, how can I fix that? What does that mean exactly? And so I want to get your thoughts on this too. But honestly, when I hear that, my first, like, where my mind goes first is that posing, you probably could, maybe stand to work with a good posing coach and work on your posing to add a little bit of shape. Because, like, a great example is a lot of times girls, like when they're doing their front pose, if they don't have a little bit of that anterior pelvic tilt, it'll make them look very just kind of straight up and down, right? Posing, it requires a lot of flexibility. So if you aren't able to tilt your pelvis a little bit in your front pose, it can create the illusion of just looking very linear and straight up and down. And so I think that's where I would start if you got feedback like that. See if there's anything maybe you can correct in your posing, with your front pose, with your back pose, work with a posing coach, and then do what you can there. And if you're still looking a little like linear or straight up and down, then the way I would probably interpret that feedback is just needing to build a little bit more solid muscle, like in your shoulders and your glutes, in your lats, even to create more of that hourglass shape. So that's kind of how I would interpret that feedback. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Typically, I hear up and down more for taller
Yep.
athletes than the male and female side. That's typically something that happens. And if it's up and if you're a taller athlete and you look up and down, it's either probably add more muscle or it's but if you have enough muscle, especially for bikini, let's say you got big glutes and you got good shoulders, but you look up and down, then it's probably a posing issue for sure. Either not being able to kick the glute out or not opening up your shoulders enough.
Yeah.
I am so shocked at how many people cannot open up their shoulders. You cannot stand at like 45 degrees with your shoulders. It doesn't look right. It will make you look very up and down.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's high level pros that I know, and they look up and down in their front pose, but that's like a posing issue for most of it,
It
right?
is, or even the
So
back pose. I see it all the time in the back pose. Girls like will pinch their
yeah,
shoulder blades. And then when you look at like everything from the waist up, it just looks straight, right? And it's like there's no lats because they're pinching their shoulder blades. And for some people too, that's like even it's not that they're even like trying to do it. For some people, what I've even found is it's just they're so tight. They neglect body work, they neglect stretching and mobility, and it kind of just makes them look very tight. So yeah, that's a big one.
Lexi, let me ask you, because you do a lot of posing for bikini.
Mhm.
Unless unless you're a contortionist,
Uh-huh.
should your front pose feel super good and comfortable? Like, should you be able to sit there without any tightness or anything?
No,
Yeah.
I can like I always tell my girls, I say, if you feel super comfortable in your front pose or your back pose, probably you're not doing it right. Like I can confidently say, practicing my posing for years and years now, like I still get very uncomfortable with my front pose. Part of it is I'm still working on really accentuating that interior pelvic tilt. And honestly, there are some days if I pose long enough where I feel a little sore the next day. So yeah, it should not feel super comfortable. I mean, it shouldn't be like you're cringing in pain, but it should not be one of those things that you can just like sit and hold for minutes and minutes without any issue.
Thank you. Thank you. The way I do my check-ins, I have very specific way I do them. It's a front pose, back pose, side pose, but the side pose is them standing straight with their arms out so I can see literally just their glute inserts and how they sit without doing anything. And
Yeah.
then I see some of the girls hit their front pose. I'm like, where are all those glutes? You have a ton of glute. It looks like you have none in your front pose. And that's because there's no flexibility and they don't want to be uncomfortable up
Yeah.
there. They want something they can be able to hold,
Uh,
but
yeah. It's well, and that's like this is
it's
another thing too. Like I'm glad we're touching on posing really quickly because again, going back to a couple minutes ago, like I said, the judges only see you when you're on stage, right? They don't know what you look like off stage. And also they don't have time to imagine what you would look like if you posed a little bit differently. So, if you get feedback of like, okay, you need more glute in your front pose or, something like that, and you're like, oh wow, well that's surprising. I feel like I already have a lot of glute. Maybe you're just not posing properly, right? Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, and again, this is why you should take your feedback to your coach, but taking your feedback and seeing like, is there something maybe you could do with your posing to create the illusion of like what the judge is asking you to do, right? If they're asking for, a wider upper body, maybe you just need to open up your shoulders a little bit more, open up, your back a little bit more in your back pose. So there are some things that you can do, some subtle things in your posing that can sometimes help to create the illusion of what these judges are wanting to see from you.
Mhm. Here, the thing with posing, and I've never actually said this out loud or put this into words. It's just thoughts I've had. So if I screw this up, sorry about that. You can't create something that's not there, but you sure as hell can hide something that is there with posing. So
I like that.
yeah, there's people with great physiques that can't show it. And then there's people that try to create something that doesn't exist, right? And you can't create something that doesn't exist. You can make the most out of yourself, but you can't create something that's not there. Another great example of this, I sent a example of one of my girls' front pose that's doing North Americans on the master side, and she has crazy wide shoulders. Crazy wide shoulders. She hits a front last break. She looks like a damn figure competitor. It is crazy how wide her shoulders are. But in her front pose, she looks narrow. Looks like she ain't got any shoulders. None. None. And so she's trying to create it with arm angles. And that's not the issue. It's she needs to open up her shoulders more. She lacks a lot of the flexibility that we really kind of need there. But that's a perfect example of hiding a ton of muscle and a ton of lines rather than trying to create
Yeah.
something that's not there. But yeah, of course, you can do things to help for sure. If you don't have it, you can do things to help. But if somebody has that muscle and poses good, you're not going to be able to stack up next to it either.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So I think posing can definitely I think it's definitely important to consider posing when it comes to judges' feedback. But again, I think this is just a scenario where it is super important to take your feedback to your coach, who has ideally, who's very, very skilled and who has an eye for this sport, and who can kind of tell you, oh yeah, I think we could correct that with posing, or oh no, maybe that, that isn't something we can correct with your posing.
Yeah, and I think this all kind of barrels down to get the judge's feedback and then discuss it with your coach. I mean, feedback from my girls the other day that from a few judges that her shoulders were too small. I look at every picture. I've seen this girl for a year. I have no idea how in God's green earth they said that. No idea.
That's so
No
funny.
earthly idea.
I remember,
But
I
that's kind of an outlier on things.
yeah, I remember one time I got feedback like that too. And it was really interesting because I remember I took that to Paul and we were both kind of just like, okay, because I had always thought that was like a strong suit of mine. But
Mhm.
I think sometimes deciphering it a little bit, like I had, maybe I could have pumped up a little bit better, pumped my shoulders up a little bit better. Maybe I could have posed a little bit different to showcase like, what I have. So yeah, sometimes you do get some of those feedback pieces that you're like, it doesn't seem like, right, but you have to read it
Yeah.
between the lines.
Yeah, it's just and I think this particular athlete could have been a posing issue along with that, but a little bit different situation with that. The information from that, if you can voice record it, that's even better. If you can get it in person, far better.
Yeah.
Far, far, far better than it would be by sending pictures. Because if you're sending pictures, then the judges have to go just off pictures. And what do we say? Never judge a show off pictures. So
Yes.
it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of these judges too, especially when we're talking judges like Sandy, Tyler, Etla, Becky, Bill, Steve, like they're judging shows almost like pretty much every weekend, right? And so, I mean, they're human too, and I can imagine that if you're emailing them, they're probably going to get back to you. I know Sandy's always really good at getting back to you via email, but I mean, they see so many athletes. It's probably going to be really hard for them to remember exactly what you looked like on stage in that moment. And not only that, but how you compared to everybody else at that show. Because I think I would say that's what matters even most, aside from just looking at your pictures alone, like looking at how you compared next to those around you. Because I think you'll agree, Evan, like sometimes you see competitors and you're like, oh wow, that's weird that you got that feedback. But then you see them up against their competition, and that's when it really stands out as to like, oh yeah, now I see why the judge is telling them to grow their upper body or to grow this, because like it really stands out when they're standing next to their competition side by side.
Yeah, and I don't always necessarily think it depends on the judge, but I don't always necessarily think they're comparing you against the other people up there too. They also have their individual biases on there as well with it. So there's some judges that like bigger upper bodies and more rounded delts. There are. And if you do not have that, even though you're in proportion with your body, they'll say you need more of that. But chances are, if they say you need more shoulders, you also probably need more glutes and more everything along with that in most cases with it, because there's very very seldomly do you hear a bikini girl say they don't need any glute, right? A lot of
Right.
upper glute, a lot of glute in general, but very seldomly
Yeah.
until you hear, hey, cool it on the glutes, you could always use more glutes.
I think that would be a dream of mine, honestly. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but another one I feel like that you hear a lot. I feel like Sandy is especially is giving this feedback a lot is, and I mean, I think just a lot of bikini girls need this is more upper glute. You hear that one a lot, more upper glute or upper outer glute. Because I think some girls think all about that glute ham tie-in. They're like, all right, as long as I got that, I'm good. And that is, I think a really important part of making you stand out in a good way in your back pose. But you could have that teardrop glute, but if you have absolutely no depth and no fullness to your glute up top and at the upper outer portion, that's going to take away from your balance, going to take away from the fullness of the glutes. And and you may do really well at, let's say, a regional show, but you go to a national show and you're going to definitely probably be beat by those girls who have more of that like fullness to their muscle. Like think of that glute muscle as a balloon, right? You want it to be nice and filled out and expanded, and it should be nice and full from honestly from every angle. So it's not just always about just having the glute ham tie-in. It's about having that nice, well-rounded, full glute from every angle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nine times out of 10, if you need more upper glute, you need more glute in general with that, because you can't target just the glute medius outside of the glute max, but it's, yeah, you probably just need more glute overall with it, but absolutely working in some glute med into your training split and making that kind of priority will help. Will help. I mean, that's kind of like, I don't know, I can't think of a real good example
Yeah.
of that. But it's nine times out of 10 in this day and age, it's going to be a little bit more muscle for most people.
Yep. Yeah. And
Um,
honestly, I think that I was just going to say, I was going to ask you, what do you feel like is like, just in your personal opinion, what's the worst feedback to get? Or like, what's the hardest feedback to get? And I feel like personally, and I don't feel like a lot of people get this feedback, but I would honestly, personally feel like the hardest feedback to get would be you have too much muscle, because I think it's harder to lose muscle than people think. And I think personally, I feel like if I ever got that feedback, not that I ever will, I feel like that would be kind of a hard pill to swallow. I think, because I mean, obviously that, you're going to have to change a lot with your training, maybe atrophy certain muscles. So personally, I feel like that would be the hardest feedback to get. But I don't know. What do you think? What would be the hardest feedback personally, like you think, to get as a competitor?
Structural flaws, because you can't do anything to fix them. But I have very rarely heard judges say that you kind of have to ask them directly, be like, hey, do I have the structure for this?
Yeah.
I think that's a good question to ask if you keep getting the same feedback over and over and over again. Do I have the structure for this? Because some people don't. Some people don't. I mean, it's not that they don't have the structure to compete, but they don't have structure to turn pro. That is, God gave us a skeleton. We can't do anything about that. We have certain muscle insertions. I mean, Joe Bennett, by the way, anyone has been watching, look at some of the stuff he's been doing recently about muscle insertions, which I've been preaching about for years on things, about how people say, like, Nick Walker's a great example. They say he needs more quads. Nick has massive quads. He just has very insertions, which means he has to make his so much bigger to meet his upper body there. It's going to be something he kind of struggles with to get that. And that's a structural thing with it. Can he improve on it? For sure with that. People see it all the time in backs. Like, a lot of guys have super high lats on backs. It looks like half their lower back is missing because that's just the way their muscle sits. For me, tall guys, a lot of times that don't have the best calves, we have really long muscle insertions in there. A lot of females that struggle building shoulders have very long shoulder insertions. So if you're a competitor and let's say you're a female that has very long shoulder insertions, very high glute tie-ins, and very wide hips, you're gonna struggle to place well at a very high level just structurally. Not saying it's impossible. Nothing is impossible, but you're going to have to be very strategic on how you build your physique to be able to fit the criteria, because there's a criteria for each division and we can't do anything about that criteria. We do our best to meet that criteria. Some people have an easier time than others based on their height, based on muscle insertions, and based on their bone structure.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one last thing I want to hit on too, kind of before we start to wrap things up, is I think that a lot of people assume that getting the feedback of like, oh, you're too lean, you need to be a little bit less lean, or I guess this kind of goes into what we said at the beginning too, like being more fuller, if that's the way you want to interpret it. So like if somebody steps on stage and let's say it's a bikini competitor and they're just way too striated, too much vascularity, just way too lean, right? I think
Yeah.
a lot of people assume, just common assumption, that would be very easy to fix. But here's where I feel like the issue lies. I mean, for some people, that is a little bit of an easier fix. Do they just maybe up their carbs, up their fats, taper down cardio, fill out a little bit with food? But I specifically know some competitors who, their feedback is that they're just too lean and they need to fill out, and they're pounding like 400 grams plus of carbs a day. And that can actually be really hard too, because, yeah, that may be filling out your muscles, but when you're eating that much food, it can also draw out your waistline a little bit, right? And so
Yep.
it's like finding that fine line. Because I know a pro in particular who I remember talking to a couple weeks ago, and like that was consistently her feedback at her first couple of shows of the season. And she was eating so much food and she was having a hard time filling out her muscles, but also keeping her waistline tight. Because I mean, you can imagine eating that much food, your waistline is gonna, it's gonna be compromised a little bit, and it may expand a little bit, even if you are eating a ton of like dense foods by nature. So I think that's one of those pieces of feedback that like sometimes you think, oh, that would be amazing to get the feedback of like, be less lean so you can eat more food, but it's not always as easy as I think people think it is.
No, especially for competitors who the whole goal is to be peeled, and
Mhm.
especially when it comes to females. I notice there's a struggle with females mentally when it comes to that. I've had a few competitors that the judges was like, if you would just fill out, like you could win a pro card. Trying to get them to add body fat, you might as well ask them to walk the green mile with that. It is an almost impossible mental task because it's not just more food. It's you need to stop moving and you need to back off training and you need to slow down
Yeah.
everything with that. And there's going to go through a phase to where you feel soft and it's going to mess with you mentally on
Yeah.
there too. So there's a bunch of stuff you got to do to be able to get that. And if you think it's going to happen in a week, it's not. It's
No.
not. It's going to take some time to get there.
I think mentally it's very hard on competitors when they're too lean and then they have to like, because you're grind your whole prep, right? You're pushing hard with cardio, pushing hard with food, and then to be told that you need to do the opposite to go into a show, like you almost feel guilty, right? And I think also you can get in
Yeah.
your head when you see other people like, doing all that like you see your competition doing all that cardio, eating very little. Sometimes I think that starts to mess with your brain too, and it makes you think like, oh my gosh, like I feel guilty for doing what I'm doing, right? So I think that feedback of being too lean is almost, and yeah, it seems like it would be a good piece of feedback to get, but I think mentally it can be very hard for competitors. So, and it can just be hard.
It can for most competitors, newer competitors, but this is something I want people to kind of think about and consider. Lexi, do you think if any high level pro that would be on the Olympia stage ever, if a judge was like, you're too lean, do you think they would struggle with backing off stuff or up and no, they wouldn't. They would do what they need to do to place better than need to place. And that's something newer competitors need to realize.
Yeah.
If you want to be good, you got to do what it takes to be good. And sometimes that means backing off the gas pedal.
Right.
Sometimes that's what that means.
Yeah. Actually, a great example because I talked to her a little bit is I always forget how to pronounce her first name. I think she does pronounce it Rihanna. The girl who won
Mm-hmm.
USA Fit
Mm-hmm.
Games this past weekend, and she got her Olympia qualification. So I was talking to her a little bit afterwards, and she actually told me she's like, this was a little bit of an uncomfortable kind of prep or package to bring because they wanted me fuller, and that's what I brought. And look at, she won the whole damn show, her first show back of the season. And so, I think everybody struggles with it mentally a little bit, but like you said, pros, like they're
Mm-hmm.
going to get it done regardless. And it's kind of that same concept of, especially newer competitors who sometimes, they'll tell you, well, I like to maintain a very lean physique year round. I don't want to gain a lot of weight in my improvement season. Is it, do you think it's okay if I just stay a couple pounds above my stage weight? And it's like, well, could you do that? Sure. Is that going to get you anywhere in your competitive career or anywhere? Like, are you going to improve as a bodybuilder by doing that? Probably not, right? And so it's a matter of like, do you want to just look the way you want to look year round and not be a good bodybuilder, or do you want to be okay with getting a little uncomfortable and improving, your physique as a bodybuilder? So yeah, and that's same
Sure.
thing applies for feedback.
It depends where you are in your journey, right? Look, a lot of the girls that are in the top five at Olympia, they can stay probably 5 pounds above their stage weight, be completely fine. Probably what they need to do, honestly, with that, because most of them don't need more muscle at that point. It's more just refining.
Yeah.
But if you need more muscle, then you're going to have to be a little bit uncomfortable. There are different stages of life, and there's different stages of your life as a competitor. In realizing those stages is incredibly important. You may want to stay lean year round, but
Mhm.
if you need more muscle, I'm not saying you got to go 20 pounds above your stage weight, but if you need more muscle, then you need to pick and choose. Do you want to stay lean year round or do you want to do better? You can't, uh, you can want all you want, but it doesn't mean it's going to get you the results that you actually want. So you got to weigh those and figure out what's more important to you. Now, if your goal long term is to be the best competitor you can be, you're going to have some off seasons where you're a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not saying blow it out of the water because people take it way
Yeah.
too far. But you're going to have to maybe be a little bit more comfortable, feel like you are, but to everyone else, you look great. right?
Yeah.
So that's another way to kind of think about this as
Right.
well, is this is a a way you look at yourself with that. But then guess what? Once you've done that a few times and you're in a good spot, then yeah, you could probably stay pretty close to your stage weight and be fine. Not your stage weight, but you know, in the ballpark of that for sure.
Right. No, that's so true. Earlier on in your competing journey, when you need more muscle, you are likely going to have to add a little bit more weight season or in your off season, right? But
Mhm.
you nailed it. Like that's why you see not all of them, but you see a lot of high level pros staying relatively leaner year round. And and I know a lot of amateur competitors think, well, if they can do that, why can't I? Right. But they have earned their right to be there, right? They have added enough muscle. They don't need to put on enough, a ton of muscle. So therefore they can stay a little bit leaner if that's what they want to do. Right. So yeah, and then I think, just last but not least, like very little pieces of feedback too that we don't really need to touch on in depth, but that, sometimes are given are like feedback. I've heard girls getting feedback for their tan before, feedback on, maybe their suit color or the way their suit fits, right? I know some girls will get feedback on like, hey, your suit top is too small or your bottoms are too small, or maybe there's too much coverage and all those little things. Like I think those pieces of feedback sometimes kind of sting to get because you're like, well, damn, like I could have easily controlled that. But the good news is those are very easy to correct, right? Like a tan, very easy
They
to
are.
correct. The suit, very easy to correct, right? And again, it kind of stings sometimes when you get that feedback, but those things are very easy to correct show to show for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of the times I see that type of feedback is for one or two things. Either people are trying to save money on the makeup and the tan, which I trust me, I understand that. I really, really do. And if it's early on in your competing career and you're not trying to run for that pro card yet, save where you can.
Yeah,
Here's the big thing with this. It comes with training, it comes with feedback, comes with everything. You can do things the way you want to do them. If you want to go up there and you be you and you want to wear a yellow suit and you don't want to do or pay for a good tan and you want to do your own hair and makeup because that's you, then fine, be you. But it doesn't mean it's going to turn out to be the best. And just because pros wear micro cut bikinis doesn't mean you're in a place to where you need to wear a micro cut bikini bottom.
yeah,
Everyone is different when it comes to this. All right. Everyone is different. And taking the advice of certain people, like I have a lot of clients say, hey, what bikini cut should I get? I'm like, that's not a question for me. That's a question for the bikini suit makers who will set up consultations to go over that stuff with you and see how it frames on you. Because
right.
I want you to pick out the best that's for you with
Yeah,
that. Not the best that's for Laura Lee, not the best that's for Jindori. I want the best that's for you because you're not Laura Lee and you're not Jindori. You're
yeah.
you.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the suit, honestly, especially the suit bottoms, if they don't fit you right, it can make. I mean,
Mhm.
they can cut off your glutes. They can just make they can totally throw off your whole proportion. So that's one thing I
Yep.
do recommend is like, I believe me, like I get it. Yes, trying to save money, you can definitely like all suit companies usually have like an inventory of discounted suits, but I highly recommend taking advantage of talking to the suit companies and making sure that when you're putting your order in it is 100% perfect for you. Like, don't just get on the site and order the suit blindly unless you know what you're doing and you've done this before. Like, take advantage of the free consults that they provide because that is really important. So, yeah, and I think too, like when it comes to the tan, I think the best thing to do because sometimes it can be hard to know if your tan is going to be dark enough or not, because, you may apply your tan and do the DIY and think like, oh my God, this looks great. But then you realize on stage, oh my God, I'm way too light. So if you're backstage like or you're next to other competitors and you notice like visibly that your tan is a lot lighter than theirs, that's probably not a good thing, right? I know Paul always says like he'll find a girl on stage who has the best tan and he'll like go backstage, look at them close and kind of compare his girls to their tan as a reference. So that's always something you can do. But I know like the last show I did, I tried to do the DIY because I was like, oh, I'm gonna try it out. It'll be easy, saves a little bit of money. And then quickly I realized, oh my God, this isn't going to be dark enough. And I didn't want something silly like that stressing me out or holding me back on stage. So last minute, I ended up purchasing from the tan company. And most of them will let you do that too last minute if you need to do that. So yeah, so I know sometimes it's easy to want to save money in these little areas, but it's like if it costs you a placing, you don't want to be beating yourself up for that.
And it's not like it saves you that much money either. Let's be honest with that. It really doesn't. It just gave you a couple bucks. I'm a big fan of actually doing a combination of both, of actually doing like base coats yourself, rinsing it off, and going to have that base layer of protein on before you go into actually get sprayed. I think that's incredibly beneficial to
Oh,
them,
yeah. Yeah.
especially if you're lighter skinned.
Yeah. And honestly, like Paul always says, be a diva on your show day. Like, I think you should definitely be able to treat yourself a little bit on show day. There are definitely some areas you can save money in, and I think we've talked about that in prior episodes. But tan, I don't know. Tan, I always, if I'm not, if you're not, I would say 90%, 95% confident in doing the DIY, I would do the host tanning company just for peace of mind. So yeah, yeah,
Yes, you can lose a show over a tan. 100% lose it. If it's a bad tan, it will wash you out and it will make you look like you didn't diet.
yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. If it's too dark or if it's too light, 100%. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, well, is there any other
Marine's a perfect example of that at
Yes.
Olympia. Her tan's way too dark, and I've said that for years. And Tyler finally in his breakdown was like, the tan is too dark. You need to do something about it. It's so dark you could not see the separation
Yeah,
between it.
she's a great example. I actually think also, because I think she was very vocal about it, Brittany Hamilton, at the indie show a couple weeks ago, I think that she had said like pretty much her only piece of feedback was that she was way too dark. And then you could kind of see it in pictures, but it did kind of wash
Mhm.
out like I don't want to say wash out, but it was so dark that you couldn't even see that muscle pop in
It's
definition.
muddied.
Yeah, muddied.
It
Yeah.
gets muddy. And if a tan is too dark, most of the time when it's too dark, it's too thick. If it's too thick, it's muddy. And if it's muddy, it's going to take away lines. You're painting your body. Just like if you paint a wall, you do 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats, 4 coats. You do 10 coats on a wall, and then it dries and try to peel it off. It's like this thick,
Yeah.
right? It's gonna take away if
It
it's too much.
Or I had a client, this happened to her. I mean, and it didn't really affect her because she won the show, but like she had way too much glaze on, and that was part of her feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and was like too much glaze. She literally looked like a Greek goddess on stage, but that's when you hear too. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of little things that can contribute to what the judges tell you feedback wise. But is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to cover relating to this topic?
No, I think we covered a lot today.
Yeah. Well,
Today with this. Yeah, I think it'd be helpful.
I think we did too. Yeah, I think this was good. Hopefully, those of you listening find this to be valuable. Please share it if it was valuable. And tag us if you listen and enjoy. Trying to think. I'm trying to think upcoming things we have coming up. I know, gosh, it's crazy to say it's gonna be soon, but Tampa Pro is coming up here in a couple weeks, and
Yeah.
I'll be there. I'm sure you'll probably be there too, Evan.
Mhm.
And then the weekend directly after that, you and I will both be in Dallas for the Texas show, which is now I think an expo, but we have a pro physique
Mhm.
seminar there. I believe it is sold out, but you can definitely still come to the show and say hi and mingle. So yeah, so we got some exciting stuff coming up.
Lots of stuff coming up. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, it will be. All right, you guys. Well, I'm going to wrap this up here, and I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week and a great Monday.
Absolutely.